Let's call to order. This would be a special joint work session for the Planning and Zoning Commission and Parks and Recreation Advisory Board.
Present.
Would you please take the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Planning and Zoning Commission Chairman Pranzo.
There you go. You're on green.
Commissioner Schopel.
Here.
Commissioner Schmidt.
Here.
And Vice Chair, and Vice Chair Frost. And Council Liaison Hawkins is present. Parks and Recreation Advisory Board Chairman Pinson. Vice Chair Williams. Board Member Smith.
Here.
And Board Member Woolridge. And your council liaison is not present?
No.
Okay. We have a quorum.
Thank you, sir. Would you all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item 4 of the agenda is a presentation and discussion of the Town of Florence Bicycle, Pedestrian, Trails, Active Transportation Plan, ATP. Mr. Hughes, will you be?
Yes. Chairman Pranzo, thank you. Members of the boards and commission, it's an honor to be here tonight to kind of kick off this active transportation plan. About a year ago, in anticipation of our update of the general plan, the 2030 general plan, we had an opportunity to apply for a grant through Maricopa Association of Governments. And that grant was for first-time active transportation plans or bicycle pedestrian plans, which also include trails now. So that grant was an 80-20 grant, so almost $100,000. We were able to get 80% of that paid for. So that really helped save a lot of money in the town budget for a plan that we were probably going to be doing anyway as part of the general plan update. So that's why we're here tonight, is to kind of kick off the active transportation plan. We went through and did an RFQ with some of the on-call consultants that MAG had, and Michael Baker International kind of stepped up as one of the kind of the best consultant for the project. It also works out very well that they are also working on the transportation study that the town is doing right now that was also paid for with a grant. So opportunity to kind of do two projects at once with a good consultant, and the two projects kind of go hand in hand. So we're really excited about that. And they're here tonight to kind of give a presentation and kind of talk about the timeline of this project. And ultimately, Larry will probably maybe add a few things as to how it will relate to the general plan when we get to that portion here in another 6 months to a year, whenever Larry gets that kicked off. So with that, I'd like to introduce Kevin Kugler from Michael Baker International, who'll be doing our presentation this evening. And I'm sure he'll have a lot of good information, and if you need to, feel free at any time to stop and ask questions, or there'll definitely be an opportunity at the end to ask questions as well. So thank you again for the opportunity to be here, and Kevin, take it away.
Thank you, Brian, Chair and members of the Parks Board and Planning and Zoning Commission. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's I echo Brian's comments. It's a real pleasure, and we're very fortunate to be here to assist you in this endeavor with respect to your first active transportation plan, as Brian said. So congratulations and kudos to staff on their success. And what Brian did mention, it was a competitive grant that the town competed against other communities to get the share of the money. So hats off to Brian and Larry and staff in general for successfully securing that grant to help promote this project. And we are glad to be here to assist you. My name is Kevin Kugler with Michael Baker International. I have 26 years of municipal, county, and state planning and transportation planning experiences, both having worked on the public sector side in Larry's shoes in some capacity, a different community obviously, and having been in the private sector for 14 and a half years now, doing a lot of different things. As I said, I'm joined by my colleague Tristan Black, who's sitting over here next to Christian Collins. We're just two of members of the larger team that's going to assist you with this effort. So we do have a presentation, as Brian suggested, but we're really here to, I get tired of hearing myself talk, quite frankly, and we're going to provide you with an overview of the process, what to expect of the process, what goes into the process, but really, we'd also like to hear from you all as to what is important, and we have a little discussion exercise to go through with you to really talk about what your key objectives are for this process, and I have some things to kind of prompt some dialogue this evening. So, without further ado, I'll just jump into it. More specifically, tonight's agenda is to really, like I said, introduce the project, talk about the purpose and need, and give you some clear direction as to how this active transportation plan, which is a bike and pedestrian focus, as Brian suggested, how that really helps the town. You know, what is it and how is it going to benefit you? Talk about the study area briefly, which is the town municipal limits, simply put. But also talk about the work plan in a snapshot and what the schedule is associated with that work plan. And then item number 4 on the agenda is, at least from my perspective, the key to this meeting is really a discussion with you all, your issues and concerns and objectives for a project like this, and talk about the next steps as well. And by all means, Chair and members of the Commission and Board, that this is a interactive discussions. Feel free to interject, stop me at any time, ask questions. Oh, another warning, huh? Hopefully we'll get through with all the power here. So just real briefly, the purpose and need, and Brian touched on it, the first and foremost, simply put, the purpose and need for a project like this is that, Florence, you've never had a plan such as this. You do have a Parks, Trails, and Open Space Master Plan that's about 10 or 11 years old now, that in pre-recession time. So the combination of really never having a true active transportation plan and the plan that you do have on the books covers a lot of different topics. This is going to really have a laser focus on your bike and pedestrian needs in a modern era sense. And as mentioned, it's made possible, at least in part, with the funding from MAG, as Brian mentioned. So how about, what is this plan all about? What's it going to do for you? Well, I know there's a lot of words there, but I have about 5 or 6 bullet points that I really want to touch on that really speak to the fact that it's going to develop policies and procedures to really create a system of bicycle and pedestrian traffic in an integrated, safe, and efficient, multimodal, all different modes of transportation within the town of Florence. So I know we talked about bike and pedestrian being a primary focus, of course, but this plan is also going to help really take a focus at looking at how to provide better connections to existing to transit stops, whether they're existing stops or future planned stops, to have a full integration with the vehicles as well, and the roadways, and to look at where the appropriate trailheads and different types of trails should be located in that regard. But those policies, as bullet point number 2 there suggests, will be supported by maps and other graphics to really promote that connectivity in town. Bike and pedestrian connectivity to the places that you live and the places, the activity centers that you frequent. So whether it's doing a better job at identifying locations and types of trails or paths to connect Merrill Ranch to downtown, Florence Gardens to downtown, the community center, Heritage Park, the aquatic center, different locales and activity centers, and from neighborhood to neighborhood as well. That's one thing that your existing plan doesn't really touch on much, is how to provide better connection in terms of its community design within a subdivision, we'll call it, and between subdivisions and communities, and having policies in place and hopefully an adopted document to promote that. So when you have a rezoning case that comes to Planning Commission and then ultimately Town Council, you have a plan that is adopted that says this is how we want to provide connections in our community, and impressing that upon the development community to provide those things. Again, how will the document really help or benefit the town of Florence? It will establish for the first time really a formal inventory of existing bike and pedestrian facilities, and identify those gaps that are in the system, simply put. So you all know your community better than I do. I'm not a stranger to Florence by any means, but having worked in the area for many times, but you all know your community better than I, and you'll tell me that there's not a tremendous breadth and depth of bike and pedestrian facilities. And that's part of the reason why we're here, is to identify those gaps and where those connections should be made, or identify areas of existing roadway facilities or other facilities that do not have a path or trail that you think perhaps should. Number 4, we're going to conduct a survey, electronic survey of Florence residents on their walking and biking attitudes and behaviors. What are you all doing today that we need to know about, obviously, that will influence the direction of this plan? And to better understand your expectations on those issues, simply put, okay? And hopefully we'll have that dialogue in a little more detail here in a minute. Number 5 is identifying safety concerns and recommended design solutions to any of those safety concerns. Florence is blessed in the fact that every community has some safety concerns, but to a lesser extent in Florence, but at least in my preliminary discussions with staff and our own initial research, from a sheer crash perspective. It doesn't mean there's areas that have bad design or unsafe pedestrian crossings and that. But the crash data numbers, not too bad. And last, but certainly not least, by any means, is obtaining community input to help evaluate short, medium, and long-term improvements. So this, as I'll explain in the upcoming slide after this one, is we're going to identify a series of prioritized improvements that we will recommend, and you all will help guide us, and the community will provide input and help us vet a prioritized series of improvement projects that are bicycle and pedestrian related. So I got a little ahead of myself in flipping to this slide. What this slide is indicating is the map that you currently have to identify your existing and planned trails as part of your adopted Parks, Trails, and Open Space Master Plan that was done in 2008. So this is a good foundation, a good place for us to begin and pivot off of, look at some of the alignments that are on there. I mean, I'm here to tell you, I don't like to have preconceived notions, but there are some obvious alignments that I'm sure will be maintained as we move forward, and we'll also take the opportunity to identify and supplement these with some other additional alignments of trails and paths, I'm sure, and really explore the opportunity to look at the types of trails. Should they be paved? Should they be unpaved? What kinds of widths should they be? Where do you provide equestrian opportunities? Where do you not? Those kinds of things. So I just wanted to, for context, illustrate this is the map that I'm sure you're familiar with that you have on the books today. Any questions or comments thus far, Chair or anyone else, before I jump into the work plan or the schedule? Okay, so a lot on this slide, and I'll take a few minutes to describe it, but it kind of captures everything in one picture here. Is that both on the top you'll see kind of the general time frames on the calendar that we're looking at moving forward, and if you like to cheat and get to the end like I do, you'll see that we're going to be with you until roughly around April of 2019. As Brian mentioned, there's a little bit of opportunity to have some correspondence and relate to the town transportation master plan or planning study that's ongoing that ADOT is assisting the town with. So this process is intentionally designed to help kind of be married to that process to gain some efficiencies in both those processes and the collection of the data and the conveyance of the data. But you'll see that there's 4 phases in the total work plan. Begins with the project initiation, which we have been doing for a little time and continue to do, as you'll see, June through August. We have existing and future conditions analysis. Phase 3 is evaluation criteria and that plan of improvements that I was talking about, and the last phase is the draft and final active transportation plan. And a little bit more on these individually, without droning on too long, but just to give you a flavor of the process and what goes into it. In the phase 1 in the initiation, the June through August, which we've already been working with staff to identify a detailed scope of work, and some of these bullet points that you see on the lower half of the slide represent specific tasks that we're going to be collaborating with Brian and staff on. But we're doing the proverbial data collection. We're here tonight to introduce the project to you. We've already had our first technical advisory committee meeting just last week to get their input on some items relative to this plan as well. And then we are scheduled, we're here tonight with you all, and then we're also going to do a similar presentation with town council to introduce the project to them and get their input as well. So we've been collecting data. We're going to continue doing that. And as we move into phase 2 is the existing and future conditions analysis. That's going to take us from the August this month and through October, which will be analyzing your existing plans and studies, not only what you're doing or have been doing as a town, but obviously what's influencing you surrounding from Pinell County and Coolidge and others. We are going to be taking some bike and pedestrian counts in town at 5 different locations. We'll talk to you about that in just a minute. I already mentioned the gap analysis, as it says there, the 3rd bullet point down in phase 2. That's the sidewalk and bicycle facility gap analysis, where there's points of disconnection. We're going to be doing the bike and ped behavior survey that I mentioned. And then we're going to produce what's called technical memorandum number 1, which is basically a report that reports on all those things that I just mentioned. And then we will present that to the technical advisory committee that's helping oversee these efforts as well, get their feedback, and then we move into phase 3 of the plan, which will take us from approximately November to January over the holidays with, and this is where the real fun begins, quite honestly, is coming up with the evaluation criteria and plan of improvements, as we call it, okay? So we'll be, as the first bullet point under phase 3 notes there, technical memorandum number 2 is going to be a report that highlights what the proposed, based on the feedback that we got from you all and the analysis in technical memo 1, what are the recommended projects, simply put, and how should those be phased over the short, medium, and long term? We'll report on those in this memo as your consultant and advisors and working with staff, obviously. We'll then report that to the technical advisory committee for their input and identify areas that should be adjusted, or maybe something we put in medium term they felt should be short term, or long term or medium, vice versa, or maybe there's a project that we just simply missed that we want to talk about, or one that we recommend and they don't, so on and so forth. And then we will vet that with you all as well. We're going to come right back to this board, 2 boards, and present our findings and get your input on that and identify and vet with you all as to what you like and what you don't like and want to see adjusted, which is expected and typical of a process like this. And then we will also stop at town council and have that same discussion. Okay, so a very important part of the process. The evaluation criteria on how things are scored and weighted to determine the types of improvements and prioritizing them, and then go discuss those with the advisory committee, discuss those with you all, and discuss those with town council. And equally, if not more important in some respects, roll that out at a public open house where we will work with staff to invite those members of the public, stakeholders, whoever you all help get the word out. We'll have a public open house that will also convey that information and get feedback from the public as to what they like and would like to see adjusted in that draft plan.
Mr. Kugler.
Yes, sir.
I might be ahead of myself here, but the bicycle trails, will they accommodate road bikes and mountain bikes, or just a dirt track, or what are the plans for that?
Are you referring to, Mr. Chair and Mr. Schopel, are you referring to a specific location, or was that a general question?
Well, just an explanation of what the trails will allow, because I have friends who ride mountain bikes in the desert, and then I have other friends who ride road bikes on the road, thin tires and fat tires.
Sure, absolutely. And I work with a bike enthusiast who happens to be sitting right over there. The short answer is, yeah, we're going to explore all of those. There's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. And so there will be different trail types for different user activities identified at different locations all through town, simply put.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I think you have a...
Could we ask everyone to speak into the microphones, please? Yeah.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. Gap analysis, and it's a fairly simple concept from the standpoint that it's identifying where there's existing facilities, whether they're paths or trails, sidewalks, or unpaved paths.
So what's lacking, is that what you're saying?
Right, what is lacking? What's the gap between point A to point B, by example, where those gaps would be?
Thank you.
You're quite welcome. Where did I leave off? So I left off at the public open house, which is really rolling out the proposed projects and their priorities. And then we get all that input, like I said, each stop on the journey to you all, town council, the public. And then we take all that information, the feedback we got, and then we roll that into the draft active transportation plan. I'm moving now to phase 4, which would take us February to roughly April of 2019. We'll have the draft plan after receiving all that input, and then we'll take that draft plan and then roll that back out to the public one more time to say, okay, this is what we think we thought we heard. These are the changes we made to the document. Let's present it one more time and see if we get a thumbs up, or there's likely to be adjustments. That's a typical process like this, but we like to think we'll hit the target most of the time. But nonetheless, we'll roll out that plan, get public input, make any final adjustments, and then prepare the final active transportation plan, or active plan, and then bring it back presumably for you all for consideration, for adoption or acceptance, however the town chooses to go with that. So any questions on, that's work plan and schedule kind of one. Hi Lonnie, by the way, I forgot to say hi, nice to see you.
Oh, there we go. Kevin, what is the composition of the Technical Advisory Committee?
The Technical Advisory Committee is, Brian had touched on the fact how we're kind of gelling this project with, to gain some synergies with the transportation study that's going on. That is an ADOT funded project. So there's already an advisory committee that's, a technical advisory committee that's formed vis-a-vis that project, of which they are doubling, serving in a more informal capacity relative to this project as well. And that advisory committee represents a cross-section of diverse interests, agency interests primarily in the area, everything from CART on the transit side to home builder to obviously the town, Pinell County. Who am I missing, Larry? I think ADOT obviously in that case as well. So it's a pretty good cross-section. Did I miss anything there?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that the list of the Technical Advisory Committee is in the memo that that was shared with you guys. So it's, as Kevin said, it's pretty much all the same people on the transportation plan that are going to be reviewing this, and then a few extra people like myself to see how that connects to the parks and some of the other facilities.
Any other questions, Mr. Chair, or chairs, I should say, on work plan and schedule? Okay. Oh, sorry, Larry.
Yeah, just to expound a little bit on the significance of why we have the Planning Commission sitting together with the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, is that this study, the transportation study that's already underway, and then next week will be the pre-submittal conference for a new parks and open space master plan. Those are going to be 3 significant pieces to the general plan update that is mandated by state statute that we'll be initiating later this year. The goal was to have those 3 projects up and running and be significantly along in their process before we started the general plan. That way a lot of this groundwork would already be done. This plan, the trails, pedestrian trails, bicycle path, and the open space plan, especially the open space portion, is mandated by state statute to be part of our general plan update. So the dovetailing these 2 bodies together is really was the goal of this meeting and the future status report, to see what type of interaction or questions that one group might have that would raise concerns, questions, thoughts, comments, whatever, with the other. So there'd be an interplay of discussion here.
Thanks, Larry. I appreciate that. Any other questions until I move on to the next slide? Which is really, the next slide is I'm going to be turning the tables back on with you guys to have a discussion. And I wanted to, I brought this kind of discussion wheel here in front of us to kind of prime the pump, if you will, to get an idea. If you look at the middle, just these are all potential topics that we could talk about. And the floor is yours, unless you have any other questions, obviously, of the study or the process for myself or Brian. But These are things, touch points that really kind of get back to potential issues, concerns, or objectives. Now, these are not an end-all, be-all. That you might have different things on your mind, and that's what we want to hear. But we could talk about anything, and I'll just go in kind of clockwise. Regional connections that you want to see happen, that you want to make sure we're aware of. Existing neighborhood connections, I was touching on that already. Anything relative to the CAP Canal Trail, which is identified as 2 trails, one on each side of the canal, already in your plan. Do you want to talk about public engagement? You want to make sure a certain organization is contacted or a certain individual plugs into this process? Please let us know. Existing or planned parks and open space connections. Larry just talked about how you're going to kick off your parks plan, so the timing will be great to dovetail, as Larry touched on. And I know Brian's actively working on the preserve that you all are working on. What types of connections? Where do we want those connections to be? What types of passive or active recreation opportunities will be there, and how do we want to program trails accordingly, or bike facilities? We can talk about certain bike or pedestrian count locations. We've had that, so I mentioned we're going to be doing official counts. They do that via video these days, believe it or not, of bicycle and pedestrian. We want to look at some activity centers, and we know there's not a lot of them in Florence, but you do have them, where bicycle and pedestrian activity is pretty common these days, and particularly if it's exacerbated by a safety issue, okay? So if you think in your minds, hey, I see this safety challenge in this mid-block crossing of a street or a certain crosswalk you don't like, or help us, guide us where is the best place for us to go out and do those counts, okay? That's what that bubble's all about. Is it a public safety issue? I touched on that a little bit. Is there a safety consideration relative to either transit stops or the use of behaviors of bikes, or the design of a bike facility in relation to the traffic it's riding next to, or not? I talked about transit stop locations. Those who are transit enthusiasts, we want to make sure that, and part of that gap analysis is providing better internal town locations to the transit facilities, and making sure that they are ADA compliant as well. So that's an important connection piece, obviously, is the transit stops for the very people that use that service frequently. Activity center connections, I talked about that already, making sure, hey, there's a certain place in town that you think should be better connected via a bike path or trail or sidewalk or path. And I'm not sure what happened to the Y on ADA accessibility, but also if there's, for those who have impediments or physical challenges, making sure that there's ADA accessibility for access for all individuals as part of all things bikes and pedestrian facilities. So,
Mr. Kugler,
yes.
I don't want to get down in the weeds too far, but is this planned off out in the brush? Is it going to be used by pedestrians and bicycle riders as at the same time? And what is the surface that you're planning? I say I'm getting down into the weeds, but what is the surface that will be out in the desert, let's say? Are you going to have macadam, or are you going to have just plain old dirt, or what's the thought of that?
Mr. Chair, no. Go ahead, Brian.
Sure.
I'm sorry.
There'll be, as Kevin mentioned earlier, there's going to be different types of surfaces depending on where we're at. When you look at an active transportation plan, a lot of times you'll just have a bike lane that's striped on the side of the road, and that's for the kids or anybody who rides a bike to stay in that. But you may also still have a sidewalk right next to it, as we do in a lot of places, and that's for pedestrians. Some of the trails will be, as we connect, and there's not a whole, right now there's not a whole lot. We're looking out at Post and Butte. We're looking at what the Pinal County open space folks have done with their trails plan, and how we can connect to that to make sure folks can get, if they want, if we get to the point where we develop the CAP Canal Trail along there, some of those trails are going to be dirt, and it's going to be designed more for your joggers, hikers, mountain bikers. But the goal is that when they come off that trail, that they can still stay in a bike lane and get to where they're going, or still stay on a sidewalk and get to where they're going. So you're going to see a number of different surfaces depending on where the location is. So again, the point is just making sure everything connects so that we talked earlier before the meeting with Chairman Pronzo. He goes for a walk in the morning. Well, you get to a certain point where maybe a sidewalk stops and it should continue. This plan is going to help identify that, the gap analysis, so that, so again, it could be, you know, like I said, multiple different surfaces and multiple different areas that are going to be affected. So, you know, again, a lot of different studies. We're going to look at the schools, primarily as far as how kids are getting to school. Are they walking? Are they biking? We know a lot of kids walk, but we know a lot of kids also don't bike. And why don't they bike? Is it because it's not a striped bike lane? Do they not feel safe? Things like that. So we're looking at attitudes. We're looking at counts. And so a lot of different things will help us determine, again, where we need things, where there's gaps, and how people are using them. And again, so depending on the area, surface will vary.
Thank you.
Long answer to a short question, so.
Thank you.
Just if I could add also, if there's things that come into your mind after this meeting, don't feel like this is your last shot. If things come into your mind after this meeting, forward them, questions, comments, whatever, to either Brian or myself, and we will forward those on to the consultants, first of all. Second, if you like, we can forward copies of this PowerPoint to each of you tomorrow if you would want, you know, just so you have them. If, you know, it shouldn't be any problem. I think we've already forwarded the staff report. If we did not, we will make sure you get that also.
This seems to be a collaborative exercise, and it seems to me that when we get the first draft, start hatching the real ideas, that'll be our opportunity to give input and to start helping it take shape. I don't think at this point we really have any idea what the magnitude or cost of this is going to be. So we'll leave it to you and you, Mr. Hughes, to do brainstorming. We'll see what we get.
On the using the canals, I'm just wondering, I know up in the valley, SRP, most of their canals are open to the public to jog on or ride bicycles, not to drive on, but anyway, I don't know, on the CAP, it's fenced in and that's federal, and I don't know if they're going to be willing to let people enter that for liability reasons and terrorist reasons or whatever. So that's something I think before we get too far along on planning on using the canal system, we probably need to get with San Carlos and the CAP before we get too deep on that end of it, maybe, you know, unless you already know about it.
Oh, appreciate the comment. Yes, there's opportunity to explore there, but you're right, there's some challenges there as well for security purposes primarily. But yes, we will be exploring that in detail. And Mr. Chair, you're absolutely right. There's, as Larry said, if there's an opportunity to, if you think of something after this meeting, please forward it to Brian. But yes, you'll have ample opportunity to weigh in on this process as we continue forward. So not a problem.
Kevin, one of the things that I didn't see up on your bubble diagram was kind of a general notion that I would call events. I know that triathlons and 10Ks and things like this are becoming very popular, and it's a great way that the community show off themselves. And I would hope that as we put this together, we think about opportunities like that, particularly with this wonderful aquatic center that we have, that we could host events if we lay out the system correctly, and you know, and bring that some notoriety to us. That it will require strategic parking because people show up with bikes and all those other things, and so I would just add that as another bubble to your diagram.
Yeah, thank you, Lonnie. That's an excellent comment. I know we've had, I think you're spot on, and I know, if I'm not mistaken, that Merrill Ranch has an annual triathlon that we certainly pivot off of that and then leverage other opportunities for community events with the wonderful facilities across the street. Absolutely, good comment.
Once this is all put in place, and I know I'm thinking way down the road, obviously we're going to cross the river. We're not going to do it at the bridge. We're going to do it downstream, I assume. And when on rare occasions that the river runs, if it washes out, who's going to be responsible for maintaining after it's all put in, for maintaining? Is that something that the town's going to assume the risk and responsibility for?
Mr. Chair and members of the commission and board, it would be presumptuous of me at this time to really kind of get into that, not knowing exactly where the trail alignment would be and who the ownership of the property is. And Brian has a better sense, obviously, of what you all do right now. But I'm assuming you're talking about like a dip crossing or a low flow crossing in the river that would get presumably blown out with a big flood. Yeah, there would be some agency responsibility to the extent that trail is recommended and constructed. And it remains to be seen whether that would be at the town or another agency at this point. But your point is well taken. That will be an issue, yes.
Sounds like a Parks and Recs thing to me.
I didn't want to box anyone into a corner or
Most likely.
I couldn't resist.
And that's a common thing. I mean, there's cities all over the place that deal with those dip crossings, and they're fairly low maintenance in terms of, that's got the rarity of the frequency of the event, the water event to blow it out. And then and if it's designed right, the repair on those is manageable.
Kevin, one more thing. Kelly and I were having a little sidebar here from her background with the high school. This might also be the opportunity to help the school district as they host track and field events and cross-country events, to have a trail system that will support that as well, which she said they're lacking right now.
Great comment. And Tristan's taking copious notes over there, so we appreciate the comment. Really good comment. Anything else, Mr. Chair? Chairs?
Is that your presentation complete?
Absolutely. I'm here at your beck and call. Anything else you have from me? I'm all ears. Or any questions?
Other questions from either boards? All right, then I'll say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate it. Again, if you have any additional comments, please provide them to Brian, and we're looking forward to collaborating with you in the future as we move forward. So thank you again.
Sure. Moving on. I will do a call to the public / commission board response. Call to the public for public comment on issues within the jurisdiction of the Planning and Zoning Commission and the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. Individual commission or board members may respond to criticisms made, may ask staff to review a matter, or may ask that a matter be put on a future agenda. However, members of the commission and board shall not discuss or take action on any matter during an open call to the public unless matters are properly noticed for discussion and legal action. And what that simply means is, if it's not on the agenda, we can't talk about it. Do we have any comments from the public? Then I will close call to the public and ask for a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion, we adjourn.
Second. I have a motion by Parks and Recreation Advisory Board member Tom Smith, second by Parks and Recreation Advisory Board Chair, Mr. Don Penson. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.